So hello everyone and welcome. My name is Kat Buxton and I am going to turn off my video while I do this presentation, hoping that it makes my internet delivery a little bit better. So we're here today to talk about building soil at Clifford Park, our forest. Way of building soil will be supporting the food forest. We'll also be putting in measures just by building soil that will help to manage flooding, erosion, and drought. When I say manage flooding, I don't mean that we're going to be able to hold back the White River, of course, but we may not have such devastating effects after such flooding once we get some good biomass growing in that landscape. I expect to go for about a half an hour, 45 minutes, and then I'd love to take some questions. And you're welcome to put questions in the chat if you'd like, but we're a small enough group, we'll be able to unmute when we're done and turn our videos back on. So yes, soil is extremely important. Without it, we would languish. It was Thomas Jefferson, I believe, who said, a nation who destroys its soil destroys itself. No, that was FDR. I don't know, can't remember. Maybe it was Jefferson. Either way, it's an important thing, and it's something that civilizations have known as long as civilizations have been. And we are in a state now, globally, where we are losing topsoil every single year. According to the United Nations, about 5 years ago, they said that if we continue treating our topsoil the way that we do currently, largely an industrial agricultural model base, we have 60 harvests left, which is pretty shocking. The soil health principles were designed by the Soil Conservation Service. It's actually the Natural Resources Conservation Service, originally the Soil Conservation Service, which was founded by the USDA and mandated by the legislature when the Dust Bowl happened, because we recognized that we were losing our soil at a very great rate and that this resource was incredibly important. The Natural Resources Conservation Service to this day sends agents out into the field, literally the field, to work with farmers and ranchers all over to try and help them understand soil health principles. And of course, they do a whole lot more than that. But these soil health principles were designed, 2, 3, 4, and 5 were designed by the Natural Resources Conservation Service. Number 1 and number 6 were coined by Gabe Brown, who is one of my mentors. He is a rancher from North Dakota who has done amazing work in the field of soil health and improving soil health and resiliency. So we'll be touching on these concepts and these principles throughout the presentation. The current condition of Clifford Park is what you're looking at here, although I expect it's a little bit greener now. This was taken about a month ago. However, the center of the field where we'll be working, I have a map in a little while to highlight the space that we'll be working in. We can see that we have not a lot of biomass growing and not a lot of health in the soil to sustain the growth of plants, to hold water, or to allow for air to come through. So the soil is quite compacted, due largely to the management over the years, the incredible use of the park, and also flooding from the river, from Tropical Storm Irene. More pictures of the park, really highlighting the spot that we'll be working with. Compacted soil means that there's minimal air and space for water. So it's depleting the soil life of oxygen and water, which is making it difficult for plant roots to also navigate through that soil. By loosening soil, we can get a start on breaking up that compaction. Plants can also do a lot of that work for us. As we get into the park and we do some compaction testing, we may find that we want to do one last till. meaning that we would break up the soil one last time before we put plants and biology in there to help manage that soil in a long time into the future. So the context of our place in terms of the soil health principles, of course, we are on a river, and that means that naturally this region wants to be a riparian buffer zone. It wants to have forest covered all over it. We want it to be a park. And so we're going to try and find a way that we can do what we want to do to have a food forest there and still make it a completely accessible space for the community. So a combined resources area, building in a food forest that we hope certainly over the years that we can expand, but we're going to start off small and make sure it works really well. We've got to really focus on the compacted soil to begin with. There's minimal life in the park right now in the place that we're looking at, both in terms of plants and soil biology, macro and microbiology. And it's a very sandy and high use area. We can do this. We can break up that compaction, we can get plants going, and we're gonna, I'll take you a little bit through the science of understanding how that happens. I'm gonna try and play this video. It's 5 minutes. And this little exercise gives a really thorough example of soil health, healthy soil versus not healthy soil. So I'm gonna go ahead and play that.
We're looking at two landscapes here. On the red plate, this is a degraded landscape. It's flour as a stand-in for a degraded landscape, which is dirt, sand, silt, and clay, broken up rocks. On the green plate is bread, and it's a stand-in for a healthy landscape. It's sand, silt, clay, and biology. Super important. Let's see what happens when we rain on these landscapes. Pouring water into a rain cloud, of course. And the rain cloud is causing erosion. The rain is causing erosion. We see some runoff. There appears to be flooding. The color of that water indicates that the soil itself, or the landscape, is now a part of the water system. We have dry places all over the landscape, but yet there's flooding. This seems to be flooding and drought at the same time. If we were a plant in this landscape and there was a drought and places did not get water, it would be dry at the bottom. So let's see. We find a totally dry plate on the bottom. So if we're a plant in this landscape, our roots would not have just gotten a drink. We would be thirsty. Flooding, drought in the same place, poor water quality. If you were farming or gardening in this landscape or adding any type of household chemicals to this landscape, those would now be in the waterway. Let's see what happens when we rain on a healthy landscape. On the bread. The water is infiltrating into the sponge of the soil. It's soaking in like a sponge. Those pore spaces that hold the bread out are happening because yeast is the magic ingredient in bread, which is the biology in bread. That's what makes air spaces those organisms breathe. Those pores are held together in landscapes by the goose glues, snots, and slimes that are produced by biological soil organisms that live all throughout the soil landscape. Let's see what happens when we rain twice as much on this landscape, since we didn't see any flooding from the first rainstorm. These pore spaces make up about half of the space of soil, and they are where the air is in soil. It's where water can infiltrate into soil, and that air and water, along with photosynthesis and the sugars made by plants, sustain microbial life in the soil. So twice the amount of water, and we still have no flooding in this landscape. I'm going to pour a little more because I'm really trying to reach saturation here. Saturation will happen when we start to see water flow out from the bottom of this landscape, indicating that the water is going through the soil to the base layer. Soil is a filter, healthy soil. Biological organisms and chemical interactions with those organisms in the soil, in these pore spaces, in the sponge, actually clean water. If you had to live in these landscapes, would you choose the flour or the bread if you were a farmer? If you were growing plants of any kind, you would likely choose the bread. The bread is wet all the way through. We have full saturation. If these landscapes were out in hot, hot, sunny conditions for days after this rainstorm, this one would evaporate and get covered with a hard, crusty surface, would not take in water the next time it rained. This one would get a little stale on the outside, so to speak, because it's bread, and down in the middle you would still have some moisture. So organisms and plants in this landscape would still be able to get a drink. If you had to build a house in one of these landscapes, you would likely choose the bread. Your house here might be in the waterway. If you had to get water from natural sources in one of these landscapes, you would likely choose the bread because you might be able to find it after it rained and you would want to drink it, as opposed to this right after a rainstorm. We're looking at...
Okay. So I'll be referring back to the flour and bread as we go. This picture in front of you is describing infiltration and runoff. The 5 squares above the jars are like cookie cutters. They're taken from the same landscape. So the same amount of sand, silt, and clay is in that soil. It is just taken from 5 different places in the landscape where the soil is managed differently. Which of these jars would you say indicate that the soil health principles are in place? And since you're all on mute, I'm going to just go ahead and answer that for you. Clearly, it's the one all the way on the left of the screen with the green growing plants on top. That particular bit of soil has living green growing plants on top. We can see at least 2 different kinds of plants, so we've got some diversity in there. We can assume, but we don't know, that that is a perennial pasture. The jar underneath is showing how much water goes through that soil, so infiltrates into the sponge. And notice the color of that water. So that water went through with lots of soil aggregates holding the soil together. Soil aggregates are hydrophobic, so they shed water because of those goos, glues, and snots and slimes that are produced by the organisms that hold those soil aggregates together. So we have clear infiltration, we have filtered water, and we've got a lot of water in that jar. The front jar has no water in it. So that is also showing that there was no runoff on a heavy rainstorm. So what they do for these, this is called a rainwater simulator. They run basically a shower head over this for 4 minutes, evenly spraying all 5 to show the difference between management types of land and how much water will infiltrate as opposed to run off. And just taking you over to all the way the other side of the slide, the jar that appears to be just bare soil, and we can assume that that's tilled, did not collect any water into the infiltration jar. All of it went off to the runoff jar and took a lot of soil with it, as you can see from the color of that soil. So holding landscapes in place is something that we can do, and it just means that we need to create the condition for healthy soil to thrive. I don't like to read my slides, so I'm not going to read these things to you, but I'll talk for a little while you read them. And this is being recorded, so you'll be able to view this afterwards as well. I'm also happy to provide individual slides on request. Soil organic matter is the thing that we need to add back to Clifford Park, and that comes in the form of plants and roots and bugs and compost and wood chips and shavings and leaves and grass clippings, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. These are all things that we can gather from our community. I know that we've already begun to gather some of them, or we have some people that are donating to us. As we add these materials back into Clifford Park, many of them will just be placed on top of the ground. So when we build soil, we really don't have to go into soil, we build it on top. However, as I mentioned earlier, we are dealing with some pretty compacted situations, conditions. So we may find that we want to till in one time to break through that compaction to give the plants a chance. A 1% increase in organic matter at Clifford Park is going to hold over 20,000 gallons of water. So that's per acre. In the top 6 inches, land can hold over 20,000 gallons of water for every 1% increase. So we're going to be able to hold a lot more water in our soil, which is definitely the goal. This is one of my favorite slides. This is showing the potential of root systems. Of course, what kind of soil you're growing in makes a difference. If you have bedrock underneath you, your plants are going to hit that bedrock and grow sideways, just like everything else does. But this particular slide is from Southwestern Prairie Plants, and it's showing here that some of these plants are going down 15 feet. If the conditions in the soil are there, roots will go very deep. And that is really critical because the nutrients that get into soil come from the subsoil, which is generally below, well, it's always below the topsoil in the mid layers through the horizons of soil. So the sand, silt, and clay that makes up the subsoil is where the basic nutrients come for all landscapes across the globe. The way that those nutrients are delivered to plants is through biological systems, through microorganisms. So we'll talk about that in a little bit. One thing I always like to point out here is the red circle on the top left. That is showing your standard lawn and the amount of root systems supporting a lawn. As we learn about the rhizosphere and the role of microorganisms in soil, we might want to think about not having lawn, and that's one reason that we are doing a food forest in this portion of the park. So the blue area in these slides is indicating what is called a rhizosphere. This is a very, very small area that surrounds every single root hair in a plant. On the left side, you're looking at a tree rhizosphere. And as we learn more about root systems and their partnership role with mycorrhiza fungi, we actually find that the rhizosphere is a lot bigger than is depicted in this picture of the tree. Mycorrhizal fungi are indicated here by the white strands coming in from the left and the right. You may have heard that trees talk. There is a wonderful TED Talk out there by Suzanne Simard called When Trees Talk. I think that's what it's called, and it's fabulous. She's a researcher who's been working on understanding the role of mycorrhizal fungus in forests for a very long time. The red dots indicated in the blue section and all along the brown area, those are biology. So those are bacteria, protozoa, nematodes, etc., that might be in the rhizosphere. Largely bacteria, what we're looking at probably at Clifford Park and in most grassy areas, but as we move toward a forest scape, we'll be finding more fungal growth in our landscape, and that's good stuff. The brown area in the center is actually just a microscopic root hair. So that rhizospheric area is a place where the action happens. So the more that we can increase root systems in the ground, the more rhizospheric action we get and the more biology we end up with in our soil. This is an example of what's called the soil food web. We've known about soil biology for a long time, but it wasn't until the mid-90s that we began to understand that there are multiple trophic levels within the food web. So some eat others and others eat those, and we need them all in order for nutrient cycling to happen. Bacteria hang out in the root zones, but they can't really move around. Although plants, we are now finding that some plants are able to eat bacteria. I could go on and on, but I won't geek out That's called rhizogephy, and that's a really exciting new finding in soil microbiology within the last few years, and that has opened the doors for our understanding quite a bit. So more roots, more plants will get us deeper soil, and we build it from the bottom up. So it comes with the plants. We're building on top of the soil. The sun is our driving factor. So sunlight is the driver of photosynthesis. It is why we have so much biomass. We're going to focus here on just the 50% arrow that goes down into the ground. So the sun has an energy budget. 50% of that energy is absorbed into the planet and by trees and plants. And those trees and plants take about 30 to 40% of the sugars that they get from the sun, which is carbohydrates, which is drawing down carbon dioxide. They are storing that, throwing it right into the root systems. We like to think of it as a selfless investment into the root system. And they're doing this because trees know, trees do talk, and trees are feeding those sugars to billions and billions of microorganisms. And this whole process of photosynthesis requires lots of green growing plants. The leaf was our first photovoltaic panel. So this is how we draw down the sun and put the carbon back into the ground in the form of soil biology. We can build the soil carbon sponge with plants through photosynthesis and through that magic process where microbes are eating sugars and producing the goos, glues, snots, and slimes that help to create these soil aggregates that you're looking at in the middle and right side of this slide. That middle slide was taken at one of my mentors' farms up in Westfield, Vermont, Jack and Ann Laser, longtime dairy farmers, pasture raised, and their soil is amazing. So we were really excited. Even in very, very droughty conditions, they hadn't received rain for 2 months in this field, and we still found immense soil aggregates and stable soil underneath that grass. So building soil aggregates is really what we're all about, but we don't have to work hard on that. All we have to do is create the conditions for photosynthesis, and the microbes will build those soil aggregates for us. So our job is to create the conditions for thriving biology in our soil. A healthy teaspoon of soil could have over 10,000 species of bacteria, several hundred nematodes, 10,000 protozoa, et cetera, mile of fungal hyphal strands in 1 teaspoon of soil. So we can build that soil. That's what we're going to do together. So how will we do that? I brought here on this slide, on the left side in the green, are the soil health principles. And on the right side is where I'm applying those to Clifford Park. So the first thing that we're going to do is understand our context, that we are trying to make a thriving riparian buffer come back to support the biology, including the humans in that area. We need to manage the compaction, add organic matter, and secure water in the soil. And also we're looking at a cistern to get us started with that. Secondly, we will plan our paths and bed designs, and then we'll plant some cover crops. Then we will design for maximum diversity above and below the ground. We'll design using plants above the ground that we also know help with the soil biological functions underneath the ground. We will also be designing a management plan, making sure that we are causing minimal disturbance and for many years to come, so that we can make it clear and easy for people to take care of our park together. We'll be mulching and building up the soil beds for planting. And then in terms of animals, we'll be adding microbes. So we'll be adding worms and microbes. Those are our animals for the context of the soil health principles, but who knows what the future will bring. Maybe we'll have chickens and goats. So this is the area that we're focusing on, the yellow circle, alternative use area, the red square. The other areas are possible in the future, but for now we're going to focus on that particular area. Our process again will be to design the paths and bed shapes. We'll be gathering sheet material sheet mulching material for paths, cardboard, newspapers, wood chips, leaves. That's where we are right now. Next, we will loosen compaction in the bed areas with either broad forks or tillage. We'll have to go down to the park and see what it needs. Then we're going to build soil in the beds with the leaves, straw, compost, and manure. So we'll outline our paths, and then we can start working on breaking the compaction in the beds. We don't need to do that in the paths at all. Then we'll begin planting soil building cover crops and planting keystone species. All of this is going to help us to slow and sink the water into the soil sponge. And when I mean the water, I don't mean the river, I mean the rainwater. We're going to slow and sink that rainwater to build the soil sponge at Clifford Park. After we build, and while we're building the soil, because we'll be doing that for many years, and the plants that we build will help us do that, we'll be going through a species design process, which Sharon Ganey will be leading us through from Permaculture Solutions. And this isn't what the park's going to look like. This is just a sample of what species groupings can look like. As we go through that species planning process, we're going to want to be thinking about diversity and planting enough species to that attracting lots of insects and birds and providing for all the humans that live in and around the park, deer, ducks, etc. We should be thinking about everybody that lives there. And so our community process has been that we are building a Clifford Park team. We have started that process. We have a good team started. We're welcoming everyone to join us. If you would like to join us, we'll make sure by the end of this recording that we have given you the good contact information to do that. The second part of our community process is building skills, and this is the first of 3 presentations that Sharon and I will be putting on to help build out the community education that we need for this park. And then after and throughout, we'll be building soil, and all to grow a food forest. The physical timeline, this is a little bit more specific. We have marked the spot, so we know that we have about 22,000 square feet of space in that area. Kai has gone down and marked that spot and put stakes there. So if you're living in the community and you're curious, you can go down and see where those stakes are. June is right around the corner, and we've got a lot to do in June. So we'll be designing and marking the paths and bed shapes first, gathering materials, loosening the compactions, and we'll begin building soil in those beds. In mid-June, we'll be working with Sharon to do a species design process. In late June, I think we can start planting cover crops, soil building crops, and some keystone species such as fruit trees or particular shrubs that we know that we want. In July, we'll have a design plan that we'll be submitting to the Park and Rec Department and committee for approval. And once that is approved, we'll be planting trees and putting in the tree guilds. And the guilds are just a series of groupings of plants that help to support the trees or central planting of a bed. So there are lots of ways to get involved. We have 4 teams started already. There could be more. We've had some people join with ideas that we haven't even thought of, and we welcome that too. So please join us in our Clifford Park Food Forest team. And that's it for me, Kat Buxton. This is my business and my website, growmorewasteless.com, if you want to learn more. And I'm going to go back and gag you and invite you all to turn on your videos if you would like. I'm going to try to turn mine on for a little while. Were you able to hear everything? Excellent. You never know when you're presenting if they can hear you or not.
There were a few times when I don't know, the internet messed up a little bit, but I don't think that it really took enough out to make it so that it was incomprehensible. So
great. So I would love to answer questions either about technical stuff with soil or specific to Clifford Park planning. Toss me your questions. Yeah,
well,
John.
I have one.
Yeah.
What is glomalin?
Glomalin is that is sort of the outer casing of the mycorrhizal fungus. And so that is considered long-term carbon. Yeah, it's also called chitin. I think that's the same thing. So that is, yeah, long-term carbon. So developing mycorrhizal fungus into our soil systems is one way that we can be sure that we're sequestering carbon and not, slowing carbon down a little bit in that cycle. And I hope we'll have lots of it in Clifford Park over the years. Yeah, Frederica.
I have a couple questions. You mentioned deer. Usually we try to keep deer out because they eat things that we are attempting to grow. So what is the what are we going to do with the deer?
Well, that's something we can look at as a committee. If we want to fence in that whole area, that's something we consider. But we might also want to consider, can we plant things for the deer? Because they live there too.
Yes. Okay,
But
good.
I know they're a problem. I know we have a lot of deer, and I know the tick associations and all that, but we're not going to be able to keep them out of the park unless we fence.
No, I just wondered how, if that already was something that was being factored in.
No, but
Secondly,
we will want to put in some protections for our young trees to let them establish. Once a tree gets established, it can handle some deer damage, but yeah, for
you fence it, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Secondly, about storage, as resources begin to come in, cardboard, compost, and so forth, can we use that shed?
I think that might be a question for Dylan.
I have no problem with it. I mean, I assume a lot of this planning is going through the rec commission. I assume you guys are working closer with them, and at this stage they've approved what is happening. I have no problem with on my end using that space of storage. I always thought that would be a resource to be had down there.
Is it locked?
It is locked, so I would have to give probably Kat a key.
Okay.
I wouldn't be giving out keys to everybody, but
So then my last question at the moment is aerating the soil. Is there I've seen posts, go in and create holes in the soil to aerate it.
Mm-hmm.
Is that something that we could do?
It's possible. I think what we'll do is a very, very simple soil compaction test where we basically hammer in rebar and see how far we can get with just a little bit of strength. And if we can't get too far down, then we are going to want to bring in a tiller, I think, to loosen. So poking holes is a great idea if you can get holes into the soil. And root systems will help to break through some of that compaction if we choose, especially if we start choosing some really good soil building plants early on. We call those jackhammer plants. So these are plants that have like a really strong taproot that can kind of.
I remember at the school where I taught, the grassy field was used
last time.
for children.
Get some air down there and then fill that space with biologically organisms and plants that can continue to do the work for us.
Okay. Good. Thank you.
And I just wanted to say, Dylan, I think it's a great idea to put cardboard in that building, and you and I should maybe meet down at the park sometime so we can talk about where wood chips and things like that can stay outside, where we could dump those and not have them be in anybody's way.
Yeah, I have already started saving cardboard. So I wanted to know where to put it.
Great. We'll need a mountain of it, and ideally the tape is removed. Well, the tape has to be removed before we put it into the park.
Right.
It's a great job for kids to help out with, but we do want to remove tape and staples.
Is it
Um,
okay if it has like a little bit of like food matter or anything like
Fine.
that? That's
Food
fine.
is, yep, food's fine and glue is fine.
Okay.
Glue is typically, actually, the fungal organisms tend to like that. That's my understanding, but
Well,
staples and
glues were one of the 4 things that you, you know,
it is
repeated
true.
there, so
It wasn't quite the same kind of glue, but
neanderthals.
but yeah, but tape, I've tried and it just is there. 10 years from now.
Plastic.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, so we'll pick that up so that it'll all end up in the river if we don't, so.
But I agree, Kat. I have a spot perfect. We just need to mow it out a bit. But there is a spot where we can keep material.
Great,
Also want to say great presentation.
thank you.
I mean, I think Clifford Park is probably the best site for this project because if anybody's been down there recently, it's kind of like the it's hard luck club down there. So having this kind of approach to land management and be an example for that, and then hopefully we can kind of get away from the traditional, chemical, move to a more organic turf management program.
That'd be great. Yeah, it is important to have examples and hopefully this park can be one of those where people come and see.
I missed some of that schedule. Is there anything like in the creation phase this Memorial Day weekend, or is everyone taking that off?
Yeah, this weekend I'm full with the rain garden at the Hartford Lyman Point Park.
Okay, I'll come by. My back is still admittedly recuperating. I need to go see a physical therapist about it, but I will come by and see how
The
it's going.
hardest work is done. We've busted through busted through the ground. Now we're adding things in, so it's
Oh, that's great.
it's a little bit easier.
Okay.
Yeah, we're gluttons for punishment. For Frederica, go ahead.
I am a little bit thinking about the residents of the Clifford Park area, and I wonder about creating some kind of a flyer or information sheet, which could possibly live at the library, so that Clifford Park residents going through there or any other locus that they have for communication, that we could write up what we're doing, so that people don't come 2 months from now and say, what the heck is going on out here? Because for whatever reason, they've been out of the loop. I think it's important. Yeah, Kai.
I totally agree with that. I think that could be really, really useful. And I'm intending to go and talk to Sandy, who's the librarian there. I know that she will be interested. Yeah, but I'll talk with her about the possibility of having some sort of a display, and even maybe something that we could add to, or change or whatever once in a while, to tell people what's going on and to give them an idea of possible ways that they could help out.
Well, should we not be utilizing the listserv? I mean, I feel like that's the best way of disseminating this information, no?
It is, but the visual is a really important element. Like Kat has these beautiful slides about what's going on with the soil and what potentially we're looking to do. And I think to have some kind of trifold with those pictures in the library would, have people in the Clifford Park area saying, have you seen what's going on in our park?
Well, that's also why I wanted to throw my hat in the ring for the social media presentation, because I think that would be another way of showing those visuals and getting people excited.
Absolutely. It would.
But
But there are some people who just are not online and
Sure.
stuff.
No, I'm not expecting to get everyone through Twitter, but
Library.
So let's do both. I mean, let's do
Yeah.
all of it.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And I would like to be involved with the trifold thing. I think,
Let's do that together.
okay.
What
And-
about a flyer that could go to people's houses?
Oh, that could be good too. Yeah.
I,
Is this turning into a crow meeting? Because that might be a problem.
What determines a crow meeting?
Well, we start discussing crow business, like particulars, like we're doing now.
Oh,
I do
I
think,
have some more questions for Kat.
great,
There we go.
great. Let's do that, John.
Okay, great. I was interested in you saying that you wanted to add worms. And so my understanding or my science says that we didn't have earthworms before people brought them here. They were pretty much extirpated from this area by the glacier. And I also understand that we are all used to having worms in our gardens. And many types of earthworms certainly don't seem to be a problem for gardens. And I understand the snake worm is one that's particularly obnoxious, or especially obnoxious. But I was interested in the fact that you said that we would add worms. And I just am sort of looking for your backup or reasoning.
Yeah, thanks, John. Good question. I don't want to add any worms. What I want to do is create the conditions for the worms that are already there to work for us.
Okay.
I definitely don't want to bring any snake worms in. And that's one reason that I'll be reviewing any materials that come into the park. Yeah, worms are not native, and neither are we. Right? Yeah, so they're here. I definitely don't want to introduce species on purpose. I think some of that might happen anyway when we bring in some materials, of course. But yeah, it's a really good point. Our native systems didn't have earthworms, and I suspect we've also lost a lot of niches that were here that the earthworms have then come in to replace. It's kind of hard to know because we didn't understand soil biology the way that we did then. But yeah, it is a concern of mine bringing in invasive species, but I do see that worms are excellent soil builders. And when the conditions are balanced, we find them to be, within balance within the ecosystem, as much as we know we can do in this point in time. I hope that was helpful.
Yeah, great. Thank you. I would suggest that we're going to be bringing a whole lot of organisms in with our organic matter and our compost anyway. There's no way to avoid that.
Right.
One. And certainly among those organisms are fungi that you're describing we really want to have there.
Yeah.
So we are, I think what we're doing is we're creating something that's artificial, but we're trying to, as much as possible, mimic what might have been there 400 years ago in some fashion.
Yeah, right. And and it's hard to say, right? Because when did native start and when did it end and all that? The way I like to think about it is creating the conditions for native ecosystems to thrive. So it will take a lot of listening on our part, and that's one reason content and employing the soil health principles. I think it's important for us to remember that the working is a riparian buffer. That's what wants to be there.
Yeah, so originally, almost certainly that was a silver maple ostrich fern forest. That would have been really common up and down the Connecticut River. And we don't have many examples of that just because it makes such good farmland. So, yeah.
Right. Well, and that's, John, I'm so glad you're in the mix, because some of those native species that we know should be there are some that we may want to actually bring in, like ostrich fern. They're also incredible soil stabilizers, erosion control, soil builders. Definitely, and you can eat them.
Okay. Another question. I've done a little bit of bed building and kind of my own gardening. Never really consulting with a whole lot of people. And quite frankly, the time when I was studying it is, oh, I hate to say it, 40 plus years ago. So one of the things that I did was we would double dig. And by doing that, what I mean is that we would outline where the bed was and would dig out 1 shovel deep soil out, move that all out of the bed, go down another shovelful deep. So you're getting down there, I don't know, 16 inches or so. And then we would combine organic matter with that. And in our case, it tended to be, I mean, we try to get as much compost as we reasonably could afford, blend it all together, and that would go back into the bed. And of course, by then it would be raised, because if we put in 2 or 3 inches or 4 inches of compost on top of that, or mixed in with it, we probably have aerated the soil some, or we fluffed it up at least. The word is failing me. We've made it more friable. There we go. That's the word I was looking for. And so I'm just sort of curious, how deep are we going? Because and the reason I'm asking is that my sense is that this is a long time of, you've already expressed, it's a long time of compaction. There probably are a significant number of particles of clay in there, which packs really hard. And I don't have a clear sense of what root systems do to those really compacted layers. And I suspect the fact that it's so compacted is why there isn't any soil, or there's no vegetation there. I don't think it's a result of human caused stuff, except for the fact that maybe after Irene, somebody drove a bulldozer or a bucket loader all over it and moved what had come downstream off of it.
Yeah, I assume a lot of the compaction has come simply from the weight of the river.
Fair enough.
Flooding that area. That's a whole lot of water. And it's not unusual along river sides, but we also have very sandy soil, which is the larger particle. While certainly there's some clay in there too, I think that's geographically, that's what the soil surveys say, is that we have some clay and some sand, but it's pretty sandy. In terms of how deep we go and double digging, I'm familiar with the process of double digging, and it's one of the processes that is now frowned upon because it's disturbing so much. And it's mixing subsoil with topsoil, which is biologically different. So the organisms that live in each of those would be different. So in terms of the depth of how far we go there, I wouldn't want to go too deep, honestly, John. I think that the depth of a broad fork would maybe be the deepest we go, just to loosen. Many of the species that we'll be choosing will be tap-rooted dynamic accumulator plants that are, I'm going to use the word designed, but that's not quite right because we didn't do it. But these plants have wonderful functions of being able to break through compaction. We can also use, in the process of building soil, forage radishes and some of the traditional cover crops that farms use to break up hard pan compaction from plows. So typically, farmland just below the depth of the big O. And traditionally, we started out with just scratching the soil a little bit, and then we developed tools and we went a little deeper, and then our compaction layer went to 6 inches. So we made a plow, and then we went to 12 inches, and guess where the compaction layer went? And then eventually, we created subsoilers, and we're going down 2 and 4 feet. And now guess where the compaction layer is? But what we're learning is that if we can create the right conditions, those plants can help us to break through some of that compaction as well. But we will have to do some tests. The standard test would be a penetrometer test, but those are like a pretty expensive tool. If we happen to know someone who has one, we could bring it down to the park and that'd be great. But the cheap way to do that is rebar in a pounder.
So you had mentioned I think something that I have heard referred to as vertical mulching, which you do around trees sometimes.
Yeah,
Dig vertical holes and backfill those holes or fill those holes with compost so that you end up with basically organic matter filled vertical tunnels, if you will, or tubes or spaces that go down deeper in the soil. And so one of the things I like is the idea of getting some organic matter fairly deep in there. Now I know that the roots will help with that with time, but I just wonder if we can accelerate it by doing something that gets more organic matter, deeper.
well, I'd be willing to entertain ideas there, but what we seem to be learning is really to trust the plants to do the work for us.
Okay.
Once we break through that initial bit, I think that our understanding of soil is we tend to look at it through a very mechanized and sort of human control overview, and that hasn't really suited us well. And so some of the newer, say 20 or 30-year-old philosophies, well, these are actually thousands and thousands of years old. These are the traditional philosophies of understanding ecosystem health and soil health and depth and desertification. So going the other way with it too. And how do we desertify soils? We plow them to death. We manage them to death. So we have to find a balance between managing to death and creating the conditions for the ecosystem to thrive. And I don't know where that balance is. So I'm excited to explore that with all of you.
Yeah, and I would add, knowing what I know of the site, there's certainly compaction there, but I also think that there's a lot of just leaching that's occurred just because of the soil type. That there's just, and because of Irene, it was totally inundated. I think there was like feet of silt on the thing. And it just kind of got, they tried to get a lot of it out of there, and they recreated the park to whatever they could. Certainly it's compaction, but I think the big part is definitely there's no organic matter in the soil to retain those macro and micronutrients that pretty much bind soil together, as Kat is saying. And I think we need to understand that it's going to take time
Yes.
to do this. So this isn't going to happen overnight. As far as like trees are going to be there at the end of the year, maybe they will be. It all depends on what Kat finds as far as what the soil health is at the moment, and what I see there when I go down there, it's pretty crappy. So I think we need to this is kind of a long-term project as far as building the soil and incorporating what you're saying, John, some of those native species, but we're still humans living, and it's still a park, so you still want to have those sorts of features. I'm right on board with you, John. I'd be like, let it go back to the silver maple fern place that it was before, but that's not what people want. So it's kind of those two, so I think obviously it's about building soil to grow what people want, but it's also about like, how do we incorporate? And then with the deer thing, I think Kat had a slide saying bring animals in. That's actually good for the soil, because they're ungulates, and they have they dig stuff up, so that kind of helps the soil. So it's a real holistic way of looking at the landscape.
Yeah. I have a question to Kat. In your timeline, do you have when we have to bring in water?
The sooner the better. And we do have a lead on that. So Matt has a lead on a tank from the Department of DPW.
Okay, awesome.
What did that stand for? Public Works. And so we're looking at getting that down to the park we'll still have to fill it, but we can figure that out. One step at a time. We do have the river, we can try and get a pump, or we can work something out there. We do have a roof on site that we might want to set up a water, like a rain gutter, something like that, or a rain barrel, to just collect what water we can naturally.
Mhm.
And I think there's also a pavilion, or there's a couple of little roofs that we might be able to collect some water if it rains.
Yeah.
Yeah, good.
But I would like to, I have to look at my calendar and figure out some times to send out to our forming committee of everybody who said that they'd be involved. And I'll always send it to Matt because he's keeping track of the new people as they come in. But thinking about some dates where we can look at the compaction in the soil and begin to make some of those decisions about how far we need to go. And thinking about the bed plan and design. For me, that's one of the most fun parts of the garden, is figuring out where do people want to walk and sit and rest, and what's the throughway. We don't want to block things off, and just really looking at the rhythm of the space and how it's going to be used. Then we get to identify a number of planting beds surrounded by those paths and benches, etc. And that's where Karen comes in to help us really fill those spaces to make them thriving mini ecosystems.
So I like trees, but would you please describe the role that trees have in this food forest?
Yes. So first I want to say that based on community input, so tree species will be based on community input. That said, we also have a bent toward native trees and food producing trees. So we're not looking to bring any exotic trees in, but we might have some fruit trees, I mean, maybe a peach tree is exotic. They are growing here now. They only last for about 15 years, but we can get beautiful peaches. So we might consider something like that. But the way we look at these gardens, John, is we do what's called tree guilds. And there's a wonderful example in South Stratford, a place called the Pocket Park.
Seen it, yeah.
You've been there. Okay. So those are Barbara and Wally Smith have worked together with Apple Corps, and they, of course, are also just really wonderful, talented people. And they put together this park. It's about 7 years old, and I invite anyone to go check it out. I do think that our space will have a similar feel to the Pocket Park. So what they do there is they have these little, you might call them islands. They're beds. They have a big grassy lawn. Rather than paths between beds, they have a big grassy lawn, and then they have these islands of beds. Each one of those beds is a guild. So one, for instance, is a plum guild. They have 5 plum trees in there, and then they have a bunch of plants filling the whole bottom part of those plum trees, all around the shaped bed, all within of a diversity of species, some of which support the tree, some of which are providing herbs or medicine for humans, and some that just are pretty. And then there's another one there that is called she calls it her acid guild because it's all acid loving plants. So it's blueberries and cranberries and lingonberries. There's some lupins in there. That particular one doesn't have any trees in it, but it's got some high bush blueberry and bush. So trees tend to be a focal point for the guild, and then the species that are chosen to go in and among the trees are chosen to support the tree in a variety of ways, either through bringing up nutrients from the subsoil or providing mulch or pollination, habitat attraction, etc. I hope that's helpful. Did that help you, John?
There's
Yeah.
also,
I'm sorry, Dylan. Now I lost my train of thought. How about that? Oh no, so the pieces that I would wonder about are, they're going to cast some shade, which some plants might or might not like. And if you wanted to, if you wanted to have an incredibly efficient garden, you probably wouldn't want a lot of shade on it. And I'm not advocating one way or the other. I'm just kind of trying to do a plus and minus thing. I know that in the forest, and I would assume here, that they would also have a tremendous ability to keep the relative humidity up around the plants. They're going to be capturing water, slowing it down before it hits the ground.
That's right.
So there's some some functions there that are important in terms of trees supporting the understory, I guess. But no, I love that park. I went up, and Judy and I went up and took a look at it, and we just lost an eye over it. It's drop dead gorgeous. But I think it's really safe to say that they started with a soil that probably had been flooded, but almost, I mean, many times. It's in a floodplain, but not disturbed to the extent this is. I mean, that already must have had a whole lot of organic matter in it, and turf and or whatever else was there before the garden was put in. So they have
it was actually covered with buckthorn, sumac,
Oh, wow.
and Japanese knotweed.
Oh, wow. Wow.
And
That's
some other riparian trees, but it was a really scrubby peninsula, if you will, on that little river.
Yeah.
And they've actually done a really amazing job at managing those. Now, one thing to say about that pocket park is Barbara Smith goes there every single day, managing it. So that park was designed to have a different look. We're looking to have something that is certainly not grassy. It's not going to need to be mowed like that. We're looking for a lower maintenance, and it doesn't have quite as much sun. The one in Stratford has full sun, but in terms of the needs of the plants underneath the trees, we will be choosing plants that can grow with the life of the tree. So as a sapling, we'll have a lot of plants in there that like full sun and are helping to build the soil. And as the tree grows up, some of those plants will naturally go away or will be replaced with others that like shade. And there will always be edges on the garden that will be full sun.
And I would like to add, if anybody wants an example of a guild, there's 4 examples out front of Town Hall that Kat, you planted during our first Resilient Week. There's 4 apple trees.
But I would suggest you wait a
Have
few
guild
weeks to go
plantings.
look at them because we have to clean them up.
Yeah, well, they produce huge apples, so.
They do. Those trees are amazing. And those are very small guilds. Thanks for bringing that up, Dylan. Those are really just a tree circle. John, if you want to take a look at those, and we've got a variety of species in there. They are a little weedy right now, so it's actually on my list this weekend when we do our rain garden that we might send some folks over to sort of clean those up.
Yeah,
John, I'm loving your questions. Thank you
I
so
have one
much.
other thought.
Yeah.
And that is that sometimes a way to, well, let me say this another way. Committees and people and communities like fast results. I understand that this is not something that's going to happen fast. I understand that it took 12,000 years since the glacier left to build the soils that we have now. I'm not patient enough to last for another 30 years, probably. That would make me 100, and I don't expect to be here then. But I am sort of wondering about whether it makes sense for us to think about ways in which we might accelerate the process so that it looks like, or so apparently we've got some results that are interesting enough so that people are willing to put some energy into it. Quite honestly, we only have 11 people participating right now. If there were 2 people that were dedicated enough to go out there every day for the next 5 years, that would be wonderful. But I dare say that we don't have 2 people willing to do that. So I think building the interest and having some results that Maybe artificial, man-made, woman-made. We ought to think about that.
I wonder what you're thinking of, John. Can you be a little more specific? You mean like having annuals in there?
Oh. So I'm not so much, I haven't been so much focused on the plants. I haven't thought about them very much. Well, it makes sense to have some plants that are showy, I suppose, from that standpoint. I mean, lovely to have some flowers, lovely to have some plants that grow rapidly so you can see the difference between nothing and something. But I'm sort of, again, I'm kind of coming back at the idea of how can we get carbon and organic matter below the top inch? Because ultimately the plants will get it down there, but it takes, my sense is it just takes a really long time for plants to do that. And I could be proven wrong. That's my
So
impression.
actually, I'd like to speak to that. It actually happens a lot quicker than we think. I'd love to show you sometime. And if you wanted to go to my YouTube channel, you could find some of my other presentations on soil health, where I have some slides from Alan Savory. Those are some of the best ones that I have showing, and this is of course in Africa, so this is a very different place, but in a place where they have high desert, that has been desert and compacted for years and years and years. They were able to, in a matter of 10 years, transform it to completely covered in perennial grasses, simply by changing the way they move animals around. So we are learning quite a lot. And I think Karen probably has some examples too. I don't know if she's able to speak about that, but she runs a business, Permaculture Solutions, where she's doing this design work with people all around the Upper Valley. And we do find that we get pretty astonishing results. And it has to do ultimately with following those soil health principles. It really does. I too am interested in having results that attract people, and I think we will have that. I really do. Yeah.
There is a friend of mine who lives in Wilder, who has peach trees in her yard, and they every year are burgeoning. So they have so much fruit that it's necessary to shore the branches up with crutches.
Yeah.
Every year. She's just astounded. Now, I don't think that those trees have been there 100 years. You know,
No.
they grow quickly, and like what Dylan said, the apple trees that you planted just a few years back are already making big apples.
Yeah, we tend to get fruit really early.
We don't have to wait 30 years, John, to you know, some of us that are septuagenarians will see fruit within the next 5 or 6 years in this park, I warrant. Don't you think so, Kat?
I do. And I will mention that another technique I've seen other people use, and I'm not suggesting that we use this technique because it would require a little bit more labor, is that sometimes you can start off by overplanting. So for instance, you might put fruit trees closer together than you would. And then in 5 years, you move one.
You move one?
You move one because, you know, fruit trees really need to be about 15 foot apart.
Okay.
When
So
they're
producing fruit, you would actually
lot visual. So we might fill it in with shrubs or other things. Yeah. So
Right.
there may be some successions of our gardens as we go forward. That's something I'm going to rely on Karen for and her expertise. I can certainly lend some to that. And again, also depending on the neighborhood.
Yeah, Kat, I'm happy to jump in for just a second. I apologize, my video isn't working for some reason tonight. But I want to speak to a little bit, just very quickly, about what John was saying as far as forests and also building biomass. And Kat's already alluded to this, and I'm really excited about our session on June 9th, because we're going to be talking about specific species and like all the numerous ecosystem functions that they provide. but what's helpful sometimes in thinking of these concepts is to think of like not necessarily like it's gardening like a forest. So we think of, and I understand, I know you understand these ecosystems very well and all the things that are happening like above the soil level, but also below, and the layering. And so by creating these diversified layers that are all providing, between 3 and 8 ecosystem functions, whether it's like nitrogen fixing or drawing pollinators, we're like collecting a lot more of that biomass and that sun's energy, which is getting recycled right into the soil. And then the other thing that I've seen really miraculous results with is wood chips. And because of the fungal systems that they provide and what that then adds to the whole, growing system together is quite amazing. And the soil health that gets built and like those aggregates that we were seeing pictures of in some of the early slides where those rhizomes are, so much is happening there and you can really see it just after one season. And then when it comes to fruits, like even just hazelburts that are incredible hedges can get really bountiful yields of nuts, even just 3 to 5 years. So I'm really excited to talk about a lot of different species because sometimes they're just not well known to us, but there's things that will be, really vibrant and productive in, 4 or 5 years time, which is like a blink of an eye these days, it seems like. But anyhow, thank you for letting me butt in there. And yeah, I'm really thrilled to talk about all this.
Thanks, Karen. I'd love to answer a really geeky soil question. Anybody got one?
I'd love to ask one, but I got to tell you, I never took a soils course in my life. So I think I'm the one forester that graduated in my class that didn't take a soils course, and who had a father that has a master's degree in composting. So,
Well, John, I'm excited to learn more about forests with you. I'm fascinated, and we just actually got we now own 20 acres of forest, so a lot to learn. Very excited about that.
Yeah, it's well, obviously, I think it's fun, and I've learned a lot since I had a forest management professor who thought that everything was generated on a computer. So, and I had a silviculture professor that's like agriculture, only silva, who gave us all the definition of a forest economist, who was somebody who would plant trees upside down if he thought it was less expensive. So this is going to be fun.
This is going to be great. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. And I don't know if there are more questions. I would like to suggest to our food forest committee that we set up another meeting, maybe even before Karen's presentation, maybe next week, to sort of talk about some of those details of marketing that we started to get into here, but would be more appropriate for a committee meeting.
I would like to ask you, Kat, when are you going to be at the Rainforest Garden?
At the Rain Garden, I'll be there Friday and Saturday from 10 to 4.
Okay, maybe on Friday we could set up something.
Yes, bring your calendar. We'll set up a date. And typically Wednesday evenings at this time, I have set aside all summer for Clifford Park. So if we have a committee meeting, this would be a good time to do it. Any other questions?
Yeah, I have one more. I was kind of half paying attention, realizing that I might like to show up at the rain garden, but what were the days and the hours again? Is it Thursday and Friday, 10 to 4?
It's Friday and Saturday.
Thank you.
You were my internet went out there. I don't know if you're asking me something, John. Okay.
Covered.
Great. Well, if there are no more questions, we could end early. We have 10 minutes to go. My video's on for a moment.
I'd like to say that I just finished a course on soils and civilization at OSHA.
Oh,
And the chapter on soils, our instructor said, was so technical that we didn't have to go into it deeply. But I would be happy to share it with you.
that sounds great. There's new information coming out about soil health almost every day as we dive literally deeper into the soil and the world of the microscopic soil web. It's very exciting. We have a lot to learn.
Yeah, I just want to acknowledge that we spend a lot of time, in research and agricultural colleges. I suspect we spend a lot of time just trying to figure out how to make plants grow faster, as opposed to what the soil is really made up of. I've got I think I still have an old USDA yearbook that's on soils, and I'm sure it's all chemistry and easy ways of getting nitrogen and potassium and phosphorus into the soil, and it probably hardly ever mentions organic matter. So it's just interesting that soil has gone from being a medium in which we add stuff so that we can grow plants to realizing that soil has function, and that we're never going to learn it all, but we certainly should take advantage of it.
Right. I mean, we're learning now that soil is alive. It's a living organism. And it is, we think, the way that our food becomes nutrient dense. And part of the reason that the USDA's own records show that our food system, our foods are less nutritious than they were 50 years ago, we think is largely because of soil depletion and the way that we've tried to force our way into the soil to make that system work without understanding the literally billions of organisms in the soil that we've yet to even really identify. We only are beginning to identify how many species we think there are, but not what they are. It's very exciting. And it gives us hope. And I work a lot with young kids, and they need hope right now. And this gives us a lot of hope to
Do
understand.
they ever ask you about hydroponics?
Yes, as a matter of fact, they do. I work with high school kids through Regeneration Corps, and they learn about regenerative agriculture. And as a part of that, they learn about all kinds of systems. And we do get questions about hydroponics.
Now, hydroponics bypasses the use of soil.
That's correct. Hydroponics bypasses the use of soil. And, I have lots of opinions about that. But, in short, I don't really have a problem with hydroponics as a technology. I don't think it should be considered organic because organic is all about soil health. But there are certainly applications in the world where hydroponics may be the best choice for managing water and food systems on a local basis.
Okay, good, thank you.
You bet. And we actually have some good hydroponic growers, very small scale hydroponic growers in Vermont and New Hampshire that
Yeah.
produce greens. I prefer to support soil, but there's room for everybody.
Well, we have some really good corn growers too, but I'm not sure I want to support them so much.
True, we probably shouldn't go there. Well, so thank you all for tuning in and listening to this presentation about building soil health at Clifford Park. And I look forward to working with you all and the way Matt Alford, the town of Hartford. And then you can join our committee and
Sounds good,
we'll
Kat.
place you, we'll place you into the right group that works for you. You let us know what your talents are and how we can employ those talents to meet our goals.
I'm excited. Have a great Wednesday, everyone.
All right.
Take
I'll be
care.
in touch with the next date.
Great,
Sounds good.
thank
All right. Take care, everyone.